should have known that that was the start of a series of unfortunate events. You ready to tell your story? You ready? I'm finally ready to share my daughter's song, her birth story. And boy, I tell you, both of my kids have really incredible stories that I've shared my son's story. If you follow me on my Instagram for a while, you know that story. Let me know if you want me to share it here on YouTube. And now my song, my daughter, who's 5 weeks old, she has an incredible story too. So her story actually starts way before she was born. My son had a lot of health challenges the first year of life, first year and a half of life. And when he was a couple of months old, my husband and I were on the phone with some pastor friends of ours, and they were just, praying with us over my son's life and his health challenges, praying that he'll be healed and, the challenges will be behind us. And one of them said, "Do you have a daughter yet?" And we're like, "No." So he's like, "Okay, she's coming. Your daughter's coming." We're like, okay. So, a pastor prophesied to us that we would have a daughter and she'd be on the way. So, we're like, okay, cool. We definitely wanted more children. But to hear that, I've never really had a prophecy so clear and so direct to me. But it was definitely a good one. So we, got to put it in our back pocket and, move forward. And we actually ended up getting pregnant during COVID lockdown. My son was 5 months old, so it was definitely sooner than we thought. We were nerve-sighted, like nervous and excited. So we're like, man, we're gonna have 2 kids, under 2. How are we gonna juggle this? How are we gonna afford this? But we were excited. Like, our daughter, she's here, she's coming, and we were definitely looking forward to her, even though it was much sooner than we thought we were prepared for. Well, 2 months later, and my son was 7 months old, and we were in the thick of his illness. Back and forth to the emergency room, hospital stays, lengthy hospital stays, procedures. I mean, it was a lot. We were very, very stressed. I basically lived in the hospital with my son. But while I was there one night, I suffered a miscarriage, and it was a devastating one. I was in the hospital, and it was just me and him in his room, and the pains were so, I couldn't stand. They were so excruciating, and I was just going back and forth to the bathroom, not to be too graphic, but having the miscarriage. And at one point I had to call a nurse because I couldn't care for my son anymore. I couldn't stand. I called my husband, I called my mom. They rushed over. I was sent to the emergency room, and I had my mom go with me, and my husband stayed in the hospital room with my son. And it was the most excruciating, most devastating thing that ever happened to me. The thing about it, though, I took that day off, so I went to the emergency room. There's nothing they really could do for me. They gave me some, maybe ibuprofen, something like that. And I spent that night at home. My husband stayed the night with my son in the hospital. But the thing about that time is that I didn't have any chance to really process what happened. This is the daughter that was promised to us. This is the daughter that we were excited about, and she's gone. Because I had to keep moving. My son was still in the middle of his illness. I had to go back to the hospital to relieve my husband. I had to just kind of buck up, keep moving, So that was tough. And, in the quiet moments that I did have during that time, trying to kind of just process what happened and, thinking about it and grieving, the Lord did whisper to me, and he said, and I know this for a fact, he said, "That wasn't song. That wasn't your daughter." And it gave me a peace. It gave me a peace that, the daughter was still on her way. We hadn't lost her. she was still coming as was promised to us. But even though I believed with all my heart that a daughter would come, for a long time I didn't want to try. I didn't want to go through another miscarriage, because you see how many people suffer with miscarriages. There's a lot of information about that. A lot of people share their story, and it's powerful, and it helps people not feel alone. But I think for me also, in not feeling alone, I'm like, wow, this could happen again. I've known people personally who've had multiple miscarriages, and I could barely survive one. I still hadn't processed the one. So in my mind, if I was going to try again, I don't know how many miscarriages I would have to go through in order to get my promised daughter. So I didn't want to try for a long time. So years went by, and I'm not a spring chicken. I'm not young. So at some point I had to be like, okay, Casey, you're knocking on a big age. You have to either try, because God is not just gonna, she's not coming just without trying. Talked to my husband, and we decided 3 years later we wanted to actually start trying. I had to just trust that God would give me the daughter, no matter how many times it would take. I had to trust that she was coming, and I had to put my faith into it, and my faith was actually trying intentionally to get pregnant. So we did, and thankfully it didn't take very long for us to get pregnant. So we were very excited. Also, that excitedness couldn't be in and of itself. There was a lot of things going on personally at the time. The year before, my husband's father passed, and at that time my husband's mother was battling pancreatic cancer. So it was a very, very troubling time for our family. But this little glimmer of hope was definitely needed and appreciated, and we were so excited. We just knew she was gonna be a girl. We knew this was our daughter. But this pregnancy was definitely just like life that was going on. It was just a rocky start. This pregnancy was a rocky start. Probably, I don't know, a couple of weeks after I found out, I went to the restroom and I found a lot of blood. And I know you could read it and say that's normal, but the last time that happened to me, it was a sign of miscarriage. So I just screamed out to my husband. I was like, no. Everything that I feared, I felt that it was actually coming to pass. And one thing that I feared, that it was going to be another miscarriage, that I was going to have to go through this again. It was happening. I felt like it was happening. And we rushed to a clinic, and I was just praying. I was praying, and I was like, God, I need a miracle. This is going to be a miracle for this to not be another miscarriage. What happened? Oh, so no. Okay, let's do some more. So in my heart, I know that God could do anything, but I just figured, this was going to be another miscarriage. But I still prayed on the slight chance that it possibly could not be. So I remember going to the clinic, going into the table, and the technician was scanning my stomach. She was very quiet. My eyes were closed because I didn't want to see what was happening. She was very quiet, and I'm still praying, and after what felt like forever, she's like, oh, there's a baby. I see a heartbeat. And I was like, so many emotions: relieved, surprised, grateful, thankful. I just couldn't believe that this was it actually happened. A miracle happened. So they gave me a little picture to take, and I walked out to the room to my husband, and he was just kind of looking at me, silent, and I'm like, there's a heartbeat. And he kind of exhaled, and that was a long drive back home, and it was a tough pregnancy. With my son, I wasn't sick at all. I felt pretty normal. But with this one, I was nauseous, I was exhausted, aches and pains, like everything hurt, like blinking was, it was like a chore. It was a really, really tough pregnancy, and I couldn't believe in my mind, I think maybe it's because I was a little older. Maybe it's the difference between carrying a boy and a girl, but the physical toll that it took on my body was immense. So really, really tough pregnancy. But thankfully, at every doctor's visit, doing the scans and the ultrasound, she was always perfect. I was the one going through through the physical stuff, and she was perfect. But I was okay with that. I was okay. As we were, going through this pregnancy, and it can be a very beautiful time, but this time it was very much scattered. But that was okay, because I mentioned before, my mother-in-law was battling pancreatic cancer, and my husband was having to go back and forth from Florida, where we lived, to Virginia, where she lived, in order to spend time with her. And so it was very difficult. It's hard to be really excited about something that you're going through when someone else is really going through a tough time and battling a really terrible disease. And we prayed and we hoped, and we just thought that there's no way that God would do this again. I lost my father-in-law, and a year and a half later, there's no way. It's not supposed to happen that way. So it was hard, because son I had to care for, my husband, and it's a lot of people and spaces that needed me. So I felt like this pregnancy, I wasn't able to really enjoy it. Not really able to kind of sit in it and to be pregnant, enjoy, because there's a lot of wonderful things about being pregnant, even though it was very tough. I wasn't really given that space. Despite our prayers, despite our belief, our faith, my mother-in-law did pass. She ended up passing a couple of months before son was born. But she did know I was pregnant. She was excited. She knew her name and everything like that. But unfortunately, my daughter wasn't able to meet her this side of heaven. We believe that since she went on before son was born, that they met in heaven. They were able to meet her before we did. So that gives us some glimmer of solace, despite the fact that she never got to meet her here. But we believe that they did meet. So I became very, very sick the last month or so of my pregnancy. I got sick with a cold. I was sick with head. I had migraines on a daily basis. There were days that I couldn't even get out of the bed. And thankfully, my parents were here the entire length of the last few months of my pregnancy, and they were, picking up my slack. I could not leave the bed. I had to just stay in bed. The migraines were so terrible, or the cold was so bad that I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was really, really tough. But I, right straight through, even the morning of my scheduled C-section, I had just, taken my last Z-Pack. Like, I was sick up until the day, and it was just awful. We had an early morning. I had to get up at like 3:30 in order to take the special bath that they require with a special soap, and then I had to get to the hospital 2 hours ahead of time. So my C-section was scheduled for 7:30, so I had to be there at 5:30. So my husband and I, we got up, got there, and we're preparing for surgery. So they took me. You're in kind of like a pre-op room. Even though you take the special bath, you have to like wipe down the special pads. They put all the IVs in you. They basically intake, right? They put on a gown. So they're asking me, do you have any like piercings, things like that? I'm like, no. Do you have any jewelry on? I look at my wedding ring. Listen, there's one thing I can tell you. Even if you think you're not gonna gain a bunch of weight, take off your wedding ring while you're pregnant, while you still can, early in the pregnancy. Because they tried their best to take off my ring. They even did that thing where they wrap around a cord to kind of to shrink your fingers so they can slide off, so they can pull off the ring. It didn't work. And this is when they already put IVs in me, so I felt like I was swelling even more just from all the saline that was running through my body. So yeah, they had to cut my wedding ring and my wedding band off. Still don't have it on. They had to cut it off, which was terrible. But it's like, I could have taken the chance and not, but if anything happened while on the table, I don't want to cut my finger off. I don't want my finger to fall off. You're so strong. Where are you going? You're supposed to be napping now. So got through that. They take me onto the table to get my spinal epidural so they can numb me to get me ready for the C-section. Oh my gosh. The person who did it, very nice guy, but oh my gosh, it was so painful. I could feel the pokes and pokes. We couldn't get it in properly. It was so bad that they had to call in, the supervisor, the full doctor to come in. I was thankful because she did it right away, easy, but it was so painful. I should have known that was the start of a series of unfortunate events, starting from the epidural. So they're doing what they have to do, right? So you're awake for the whole thing. My husband is there, and I don't feel anything, and then I start feeling things. I could feel them tugging. It felt like someone was in there, either grabbing my ribs or grabbing my organs, and they were pulling back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm like, I can feel that. What is happening? So I'm looking at my husband, and he's kind of looking around as well. And then this is what he tells me, because I can't see. They have a blue sheet right in front of your head. You cannot see a thing. He tells me all of a sudden there's a whole rush of teams come in, and basically my daughter didn't want to come out. She was stuck. So her body from the neck down was out, but her head was still stuck inside, and they couldn't get her out. So they had to call in for backup. And they brought the backup in, and I could feel them tugging on her back and forth, back and forth. It was a horrible feeling, horrible. They finally got her out, and then she wasn't breathing right away. So that was another alarm. So my husband wasn't able to see her right away. They had the team kind of working on her, making sure that she started breathing. I found out later that about 5 minutes later, she started to breathe. She was fine. All her scores, were normal, which was, I didn't know this at the time. They don't want to scare you. All of this I found out, a day or so later, but she was fine. So they bring her over to me, and they're showing me her, but they're still, they're kind of closing you up. They're doing what they need to do, because you're open. You have a big open, you have an open hole in your body. And I started to feel stuff again. It was painful. I don't know what they were doing. It was very painful. And I was telling my husband, no, this hurts. And the doctor's like, no, it's just pressure. It's like, no. It's not pressure. It's just pain. It's not supposed to hurt. You're supposed to be numb. I kept telling them that. And I had to tell my husband to listen, tell them. It's just extremely painful. So he had to advocate for me. Thank God. He advocated for me. And they gave me something stronger, and they had to just knock me out. It's so weird, because I kept telling them I was hurting, it was painful, and it's like they didn't want to give me anything. They wanted me to see my daughter, and it's like, okay, I know I'm gonna see her. I don't want to be in this pain anymore. It's excruciating. It was just so weird. They were so more focused on me, just look at your daughter. Look at your daughter, and here she is. And it's like, okay, great, I love her and everything, but I can't even think. I can't focus on her because I was in so much pain. After I finally woke up, I remember them wheeling me over into the recovery room, and I was very groggy. So I spent, more than an hour, maybe 2 hours in recovery by myself. So I didn't get to spend the first few hours with my daughter. They wanted me to kind of come out of my anesthesia, and my husband thankfully was able to be with my daughter. He said they had him in this small room, and he was able to do skin to skin with her and spend those time with her until my room that I would be in for a few days was ready. Recovery from there seemed to go pretty smoothly. The time in the hospital was fine. I spent 3 days. I had really great nurses. One in particular who was a really great nurse. She was a wonderful. She was like your aunt. She was like an aunt. She was wonderful. That time in the hospital, the recovery seemed to go very, very smooth. And then I was discharged. A couple of days into it, I woke up one morning and, they told me that it would take a while for your feet to swell. So it's not feet to swell, feet to go down. So my feet were really, really swollen most of my pregnancy. So they said it would probably continue, a little while even after delivery. Well, that one morning, a few days after being home, I looked at my foot and it was bigger. I don't know if it was possible, but it was bigger. It was like an elephant foot. Have you seen an elephant feet? That's what it looked like. I'm looking at it and I'm like, when something doesn't feel right? I know what they said. I know they said that it could be swollen for a time, and this looks bad. And so I pushed my finger into my foot, and the indentation stayed there. And I just recalled something that I heard, that if you have swelling and you push your finger into it and the indentation stays, like, that's a problem, that's something to be alerted about, to a cause for alarm. So I'm like, it just didn't feel right. Something in my bones was telling me that something was wrong. So I'm like, you know what? Let me check my blood pressure. And normally my blood pressure is very low. Like top number, if it's in the hundreds, that's high for me normally. I checked my blood pressure and it was like 130, like high 130s, and for me that is super high. So I'm like, maybe I'm just exhausted. Maybe I did a little much. Let me take a nap, wake back up, and try again. Because maybe, I just exerted myself too much. So I took a nap, woke up, took my blood pressure again. It was like 140 something. And I'm like, uh-oh, this is just not right. I texted my husband, I texted my mom, and we were just looking at each other. And I had a home blood pressure cuff. So I'm like, maybe it's just because maybe I did it wrong. Maybe it just can't be. There's just no way my blood pressure is this high. So I take it again, and at one point it was like 150 something. So I'm like, I called my doctor, my OB, and I called them in the morning. They didn't answer me until like 4. So that was no bueno for sure. But I was like, something's just not right. I know, like, during pregnancy, my OB said, make sure you check your blood pressure regularly. If it's over 140, come into the ER. So I'm like, I didn't know. Like, I wasn't pregnant anymore. Maybe this is normal. I just wasn't sure. That's why I called the doctor to kind of confirm. So they finally called me back. And they're like, you know what? Go to the ER, and then we're going to let your doctors know. I'm like, okay. So I tell my husband, and he's like, okay, let's go. I go to the ER, and I'm thinking I'm gonna have to sit there for a long time. They're just gonna check my blood pressure. They're gonna say, it's no big deal, and then send me home. So I wasn't really worried, even though I felt that something was wrong. You just always think that, they're gonna say it's nothing, like I'm overreacting. And so that's what I was expecting to happen when I went to the ER. But I go in, they check me in, at the front, and they took me right away. They take me to the back to do triage, check my blood pressure. I see a wheelchair come in. They wheel me straight to the back, and it was like it was like Grey's Anatomy, or like one of those hospital shows. They just wheel me in. I hear they had an alert for me over the intercom. Like everybody was rushed into my room. I had one IV in each arm. I had like about 4 or 5 doctors working on me, and there's like tears coming out my eyes. I'm like, I was afraid to ask what was happening, but I clearly knew that something was wrong. It was not normal. They weren't really saying anything. I had like a silent tears coming down my face, and I'm like, wow, this is serious. But I just was afraid to ask. So, when I got to the hospital, I found out that my blood pressure, the top number, had like peaked like 170 something. I think 176 at the top number. So they're doing all these tests, blood tests and things like that, to make sure, they kind of rule out everything. And that's when I saw my foot. I remember a story that my cousin, or my husband's cousin, shared on, I don't know if it was Facebook, and she ended up having high blood pressure after her pregnancy, and she was rushed to the hospital, and it was very, she nearly died. It was a really big thing. So when I was seeing that my foot was swollen and that my blood pressure was a little high, it wasn't super high, but in normal standards, but it was high for me. Her story is what triggered me to take my blood pressure. I don't think I would have otherwise, but her story just always stuck with me. I was just like, wow, I can't believe that happened. That is just so terrifying. So thankfully, I took it, and I was able to get the treatment that I did. When I got rushed to the hospital, I found out that I had severe postpartum preeclampsia. So you often hear about preeclampsia during pregnancy. Oftentimes, people have to be induced and the baby has to be taken out early because of the high blood pressure, but it can happen after pregnancy, and that's what happened to me. Like I said, normally my blood pressure is low, and all through my pregnancy, my blood pressure was normal. But that few days after, it spiked, and I had to get magnesium. I was there at the hospital for about 3 days being treated. They wouldn't let me go until my blood pressure was stable. So they put me on meds, which I still have to take twice a day now. I still have to take my blood pressure and check it now, because this could last 6 weeks after pregnancy as well. So hopefully this won't be my story for life, but I'm just very thankful for testimonies. With my cousin's testimony, her sharing her story, that triggered me to check my blood pressure and go to get the care that I needed. So it's just a reminder that things that we go through, the tough things, the fun things, the wins, the losses, it's important to share them. I'm not saying you have to tell everybody. I'm not saying you have to have a whole thing online, but it's important. You could be saving somebody's life. You could be warning somebody by sharing your testimony. I could have had a stroke. I could have died, and I'm just thankful that she shared her story, which caused me to get the care that I need just in time. I was discharged from there. I went home, and about a week later, I'm just doing my thing as taking care of my daughter, living my life, doing my thing. It was right before I was going to bed. I went to the restroom and I saw a lot of blood. So I'm like, maybe I got my period early. So I'm like, okay, well maybe it just started now, or maybe I started my period, because it was quite a bit. So I go to bed. And then I wake up the next morning and I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of blood. So I'm like getting ready, my son ready, and I thought I was peeing myself. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I've heard people talk about this, how you kind of lose bladder control, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm peeing myself. What's happening? So I go to the bathroom to change my pad. I'm like, whoa, it was not pee, it was blood. So that time, like, listen, I'm not gonna call the doctor this time. They're not gonna call me back until too late. So we have a family friend who's she's a retired labor and delivery nurse. So I'm like, Mommy, call. Her name is Donna. Call Donna. Tell her what's happening. See if we should go to the ER. I was pretty much like, yeah, we're gonna go, but let me just double check. Called her. She's like, yeah, go to the ER. We'll have them check you out. So it's like, here we go again. Here we go again for the second time after delivery. Back to the ER. So I go in. They did the intake and everything like that, and to make a long story short, I had to get a D&C because they found that there were blood clots left in my uterus, and that was causing all the bleeding. And I found out after that it's something that's rare, not supposed to happen, but they had to do that procedure. But also, even thinking back, right after I got home, after my C-section, after my delivery, I would lay on my side, and I felt like things sloshing around, and I thought that maybe it was my organs. You know how your organs kind of get displaced when you're pregnant. So I thought maybe it was that. And it was actually kind of painful, but I didn't think too much of it. But let me tell you, after the D&C, after they removed all the blood clots, I didn't feel that anymore. So it's like, wow, I felt and had these blood clots in me the whole time, and I had no idea. I had no idea what it really was. Why that happened, I don't know. My OB said, they did the regular protocol as far as after they do a C-section, they kind of clean the uterus, make sure they remove anything left over, so there's nothing left inside. But she said sometimes the uterus can kind of fold in on itself and hide some things and things are left behind. I don't know, but that's what happened. So I will say, this is her birth story, but it's definitely a lot of things that happened to me throughout this, and I wanted to share because just like with my cousin, she shared her story and saved my life, and I wanted to share my story, and hopefully it can educate you or someone you know, and they can really be, you can really be attentive to your own body, listen to your body. Don't be afraid of people thinking that you're crazy or being just sent back saying, oh, no big deal. Don't be afraid. If something doesn't feel right, investigate. Advocate for yourself. You can't advocate for yourself. Have somebody near you, somebody you trust who can do it for you. But it can literally save your life, save your baby's life. When it comes to your health, sometimes minutes, hours is the difference between life and death. And I don't even have to mention that being a woman, being a black woman, no matter how much money you make, no matter where you live, we're dying. We're dying on the table. It's 2023 and black women are dying. So we really have to speak up. We have to have people, supportive partners, supportive help around us to speak up for us as well. Because like I said, when I was on the table, I was speaking up, but they weren't hearing me. I had to have my husband speak up for me. So it's important to have a good support system around you to help lift your voice when you can't. And just letting you know, Song is perfect. She's here. She's absolutely perfect. And me, I am still managing my blood pressure with meds. So I'm still taking medicine, still check my blood pressure regularly, and hopefully not forever. But this is my life. This is part of her birth story. It's part of my birth story, my new birth as a new mom of two on this journey, and we'll see what's next.